There's an island in the middle of a river in Liberia, deep in the jungle of West Africa, that's said to be home to over 60 chimpanzees, all infected with contagious diseases. They were released there years ago after being used for medical research, and now they roam wild. We've come to the Republic of Liberia to find out about the incredible story behind this place the locals call Monkey Island. Upon arriving in Liberia, one of the first things we noticed is that monkeys, apes, chimps are everywhere. We just saw this guy randomly on the side of the street. It's a pet?
Yes, my pet.
And where did he come from?
Lufa.
And isn't that where they had the Ebola outbreak?
Yeah, that's where the rumors from.
Oh, okay. Oh, the rumor. I'm sorry. That's where the rumor's from. To get to Monkey Island, we first had to drive 40 miles outside of Monrovia to a small village on the edge of the Farmington River. From there, we took a canoe to another village where a guide could take us the rest of the way. We just got to this little village and we're trying to negotiate for a bigger boat. Which one's yours?
Yes.
This one right here?
Yeah.
It has an engine, right?
Yes.
And you can take us to Monkey Island?
I don't want to get it. I don't care you.
$50?
No, $50.
No $50 US dollars?
50.
Okay, 80. It's a deal. Okay. So apparently right now we have to buy a bunch of fruit for the chimpanzees or else they get pissed off when you show up and you don't throw food at them. Thank you. Can I go onto Monkey Island? Can I walk onto the island?
No, you cannot.
What did you say? You said they'll eat me?
They'll eat you.
What? And if we weren't already on edge about the apes, our guides themselves didn't instill much confidence as they forgot to untie the boat when we pushed off. Oh my God. The rope is pulling us over.
Oh shit. We're about to fucking sit. Oh no! Oh shit! Okay. This man a brave man. Oh, you scary. All of you scary, but the man brave.
We broke half the boat. But onward to Monkey Island. Are the locals who live in this area, are they scared of the chimps?
Oh yes, if you are a Spanish person, okay, when you go there, they become aggressive. But the only thing the chimps, they are afraid of water. They don't swim across.
Okay.
They just walk at the water edge.
Right, okay. All right, so we just pulled up to the island. We could hear the chimps making a lot of noise as we approached, and now there's two of them that have come out of the bush.
Yeah, they're afraid, yeah.
They're afraid? I'm afraid. Right then, a huge male charged out of the forest towards the boat.
Back it up, back it up.
So the big alpha male just started charging us and we bailed to the back of the boat. The Liberian guys told us, don't worry, they don't swim. But right now, all I see is 3 feet of shallow water between us and that angry chimp right there. They were super aggressive, baring their teeth when we first showed up. But now that we've got some food out, they've calmed down a lot. Jerry, who they know, is pretty comfortable, pretty fearless, actually. I wouldn't go near that. And they don't want me near them. This one's pissed at me. This one right here at the base of the tree limb is splashing us for some reason. I'm not sure what's going on. The only way I could get these apes to come around was to bribe them with sugar. They're really amped about the lollipop. Even as I floated just a few feet from the apes, it was still hard to believe that this place actually existed. But as we were about to learn, what was even more astonishing is the story behind why and how they got here. It all began here, just a few miles away, at the Liberian Institute for Biomedical Research, a medical research program launched by the New York Blood Center, one of the largest medical blood suppliers in the US. The program was called ViLab. It started in 1974 during the heyday of animal testing. This place is like the Disneyland of infectious disease.
Yes.
In the search for various treatments and vaccines, over 100 chimpanzees were infected with diseases such as hepatitis and river blindness. Nobody knows more about the lab and its history than Betsy Brotman, the former head of the project. When you first started the ViLab, what was the intent and the purpose?
Was looking for a place where they could have a supply of chimpanzees that were not infected with hepatitis and that could be used in hepatitis experiments and then released into the forest. We did a lot of safety and efficacy testing of hepatitis B vaccines. The hepatitis B vaccine was developed just shortly after we arrived there.
Well, why Liberia, first of all? It seems like a crazy, faraway place to do research.
They had a large population of chimpanzees. And there was this defunct scientific institute, and it was near the airport. And the government agreed to let us work there. A lot of people had pet chimpanzees. And when they get past a certain age of around 5, they're not really very good pets anymore. And that's how we acquired our animals until we had enough breeding age animals that we didn't need outside animals anymore.
To get a better understanding about the scientific research going on at ViLab and how the apes ended up on the island, we spoke with Preston Marks, who was a virologist working at the Institute.
When I showed up in 87, it was already a big program and established. Something in the neighborhood of 100 chimpanzees were there, maybe more.
Why chimpanzees, just from a virologist perspective? Why is that
They're the
important?
only susceptible species for hepatitis. Yeah, if you'd use monkeys or mice, we would be using them. So it was a very special need. Once a chimpanzee would be hepatitis positive, then obviously you need naive animals that have not been used in experiments. So they started releasing them onto these islands. The reason you can do that is chimpanzees can't swim. Their center of gravity is about here. You know, they got little small butts and small legs, so when they just sink, they can't lay horizontally in the water the way a human being can.
We had, I think, 6 islands in all. One was a large island, which we cut into 3 islands. We dug canals. That was a huge project. It really was huge.
It was around this time that Betsy met her husband, Brian Garnham, who came to work as an engineer at the compound and whom she married in 1986.
I loved my life in Liberia. I liked the animals, I liked the work, I liked the people I worked with, and I thought it would be okay. I don't know. But it's a difficult place.
In 1989, Liberia descended into the absolute chaos of the first of 2 violent civil wars. Rebel groups led by the now infamous warlord Charles Taylor formed a particularly brutal uprising that included child soldiers, cross-dressing cannibals, and wholesale slaughter of innocent civilians. Amidst this madness, Betsy continued both her research and the care of the chimps they had retired to the island.
If they came to shoot a chimp, I'd stand in front of the cage like that.
So Charles Taylor and the rebels were coming. What made you decide to stay?
Well, we had about 100 chimpanzees, and they were in cages, and there were animals on islands. They all had to be fed. And we had a lot of employees, maybe 50, 60. And we thought that if we stayed there, we could keep the place together and that the employees would remain unharmed. Expatriates were running away, Liberians were running away. And when we would go to the islands to feed the chimps, we would see bodies floating in the water. Sometimes women with babies tied to their back. And the people were dying and they were starving to death, and little children. Sometimes I didn't want to go outside because I knew there would be dead children outside because they had starved to death that night.
As the war escalated, Betsy found herself more and more compelled to help the victims of the slaughter.
There was a hotel about 3 miles from our house, and it was filled with 600 women and children, all from this village. And they had killed all the men and all the boys over 12. And eventually I got permission from Charles Taylor, because I heard that their lives, these women, that there was going to be a massacre at the hotel. I went up and I saw Charles Taylor, and I got permission to move them to a larger Ghanaian community that was protected by the Catholic Church in Buchanan.
I mean, here you are running like a chimpanzee research facility, but in the middle of a civil war, and you're saving hundreds of Liberian women and children. That doesn't sound crazy to you?
No, I think we spent a lot of time doing those kind of things more than, I mean, we went to work every day, but we got very involved in the community. Anybody would get very involved in the community.
Betsy and the lab were able to remain unharmed until 1993, when the violence of the Civil War made its way to her doorstep.
The people opposed to Taylor were coming up the airport road. Taylor's people called on the radio, I guess, and said they were leaving. My husband and I knew we were all alone there.
As the anti-Taylor forces swept through the area, they stormed into her home and came after her husband, Brian.
They just came in. And I think they thought that he had worked for Charles Taylor because we were the only expatriates that stayed behind. And they shot him. And he just died right away. I mean, he just fell to the ground dead. And I tried to make them shoot me, and they wouldn't do it.
Why did you stay in Liberia after your husband was killed in front of you?
I mean, how could you just walk out with all those other people? You run away and leave the people and the chimps, and it just, I don't know.
Betsy continued to work at the lab and made it through both the First and Second Civil War in Liberia. But in the end, it wasn't the violence that closed the lab, but more the change of public opinion regarding animal testing with primates back home in America. It was anti-testing videos like this one of other, much harsher facilities that turned the tide against the practice. By the late 90s, when chimpanzees were proven to be a poor model for HIV and AIDS research, the NIH placed a moratorium on breeding research chimps, making the case that most chimp testing was more cruel than effective. Although opinions differ on the ethics of animal testing, the research that Betsy oversaw led to life-saving vaccines for hepatitis B, as well as a screening method for hepatitis C, two diseases that combined affect millions of people worldwide. Regardless of these exceptions, federal grants given for chimp-based research began to decline significantly. In 2005, the research had run its course.
Yes,
there was pressure from animal rights activists. So it's almost like you survived the war, but you couldn't survive the pressure from animal rights activists. Isn't there an irony there?
I think they were right. I don't really, chimpanzees really shouldn't be used in experiments. I really do feel this way. There are certain instances where it would be very difficult to do the research without chimpanzees unless you used humans. If you're going to do work in chimpanzees, you should set up a system so that at the end of the research, they have a place where they can be retired to, and that they can live a nice chimp life to the best of whatever is available.
And that is exactly what Monkey Island is. It's not just the island security guard throwing lollipops at the chimps. Since the facility was closed in 2005, the New York Blood Center has continued to care for and feed the chimps with a core Liberian support staff.
The idea was get all the animals onto islands, which we did do, and train the Liberians to run the operation themselves. And that was what we agreed upon doing, and we did it.
Although the caretakers wished to have their identities hidden for security reasons, they did agree to take us back to the island and show us how the apes were really cared for.
I mean, it's very exciting to go to the islands. And the way the animals interact with the caretakers. Their caretakers used to work with the animals at the lab, and they have a good medical background. And they observe the chimps. They go every other day. They make sure all the animals report. And you saw the place. It looks pretty good, doesn't it?
It does.
I mean, it's fantastic.
This was a very different experience from my initial visit. This time, it was clear that the chimps were very familiar with the caretakers and trusted them completely. How old are some of the chimps?
They're in their 30s, some of them.
I can tell that, like, you kind of love these chimpanzees.
Yes, I like them very much.
You hear so much lore, so much mythology about this place that to actually get here, to hear the real story behind the research facility and what it went through during the Civil War conflict, and then to meet the guys who come out here every day and feed the chimpanzees, it's pretty extraordinary, actually. And as for the chimps themselves, although they were infected with diseases like hepatitis when they were originally retired here, many, if not all, have since fully recovered. So while animal testing continues to be a controversial subject, where many of the animals are simply put to death after their usefulness, at least the chimps of Monkey Island have a sanctuary all their own.